welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a special series focusing on our road to recovery from a pandemic that many of us haven't seen ever in our lifetime. We've learned from pandemics of the past, but they've been so long ago, none of those are really valid at this point. So as we deal with something that happens once in a century, is the reality now that we have to prepare for more pandemics in the future as well. Joining me now are three medical experts, three of our best medical minds. Joining me is Dr. Radip Guleria. He's the head of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, also one of India's leading pulmonologists. I'm also joined by Dr. Gagandeep Kang. She's a medical scientist, professor of microbiology at CMC Vellore, known for her work on vaccines, especially in the development of the indigenous rotavirus vaccine. I'm also joined by Dr. Chandrakant Laharia, a medical doctor and leading public policy and health systems expert, and they've all come together in their busy schedules for this book called Till We Win. Dr. Kang, if I could go across to you first, it's an interesting title, Till We Win. And as we talk, we're already in the last week of November. We're soon going to be just a month of 2020, but this isn't going away anytime soon. What would you say? Why have you chosen those words, Till We Win? When do you see that deadline of winning?
I think the idea of Till We Win is that really science and technology are going to provide the solutions to this virus. We've seen already that the damage that the virus is doing is much less than has been projected. And with vaccines, with the work that we've done on standard public health measures of diagnosing, tracking and isolating patients, we've done a pretty good job so far. I think our interventions are only going to get better and better. Better prevention, better treatment, and we will be able to control this virus. The timelines, this is a virus that spreads very fast. So I think we are going to see that we have a handle already on mortality, which has come down. Now the next target needs to be stopping the spread of the virus to the extent that we are seeing now. I anticipate that we will begin to see that towards the beginning of next year. And vaccines and diagnostics will be the tools that help to get us there.
Dr. Kang, also, I mean, as I said, it's so interesting to hear calmness or sanity when we talk about this, because when this first came out, the news, there was so much panic or scare. Let me ask you, as a medical scientist, did this virus ever scare you? Did you think this is a virus that even with all the tools of modern science and technology that we're not prepared for? And even now, every week, there's a promise of a new vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, the Covaxin, the Made in India vaccine going into its phase 3 of clinical trials. What do you think will be the vaccine for India? We have, of course, also the Oxford vaccine co-manufactured by Serum Institute of India.
So let's start with how dangerous or not this virus is. If you look at SARS and MERS, which are the two related coronaviruses, they had a mortality of 10% and 30%. So 1 in 10 or 3 out of 10 people infected with those viruses died. We are looking here at a mortality rate that is less than 1 in 100, much less than 1 in 100. So in that sense, among the coronaviruses, this is not the deadliest of viruses. The reason that we see so many cases is because it spreads so fast. If the bulk of people who are infected are going to survive this virus, then I think this is something that could have been much worse. We could have had an Ebola, we could have had a MERS, we could have an influenza that kills at rates much higher than this. This is a warning, it's a wake-up call, but it really is not as bad as it could have been. In terms of vaccines and what we need to be looking at for vaccines, I think this is the most exciting of weeks because we have news of the Pfizer vaccine, which I trust a little bit more than the Gamaleya results because the numbers for Pfizer are much larger. They had 94 patients, which actually is a pretty high number for a vaccine trial. and they're showing 90% efficacy. That is proof of principle that vaccines will work and will work well. All the vaccines that we have now are based on the spike protein, and because there are so many candidates, I think the Pfizer we should treat as showing us that vaccines work, but we should be looking at what vaccines are most suitable for our population. And a vaccine that requires -70 storage and is as expensive as the Pfizer vaccine is going to be may not be the best choice for us. So if vaccines are going to be delayed a couple of months, and we will have readouts from other candidates in the next few months, I think we should wait and weigh all the evidence that comes in and then choose the vaccine that allows us to reach the maximum number of people with the resources that we have.
Dr. Guleria, referring to the title of the book, Till We Win, when do you think, given experience of just this 1 year dealing with this pandemic, that India and the world will win against this pandemic? And there was some concern raised when you said recently that you think that the common people will only get the vaccine by 2022. So that means 1.5 years more of this?
So let me clarify the second part. The second part was actually when will it be available off the shelf and people can just go and buy it like they can buy the flu vaccine. That is going to take some time because the first thing that we need to do is vaccinate those who are the high risk and those who have a higher chance of getting the infection. And that means the elderly, those with comorbidities, and the healthcare workers or the individuals who are getting exposed to COVID infection and may therefore get the disease. It's only after that, after having vaccinated all of these, that we could say that anyone who would want to get himself vaccinated, even if he's at a low risk or at a younger age group, can just go and get himself vaccinated. That situation would probably occur only by the end of the year or early next year, that we would have enough doses globally to be able to offer it as we would offer other vaccines off the shelf. So I think that is something that I would like to clarify. Our priority in vaccination has to be to decrease mortality and to decrease the infection, spreading of the infection among the high risk group and among those who are our COVID warriors, so that they don't get infected and it doesn't affect the healthcare system or the other management system. Regarding how long the pandemic will last, that's a difficult question. We may have sort of two phases where we will see that the pandemic is over. One, I think, is when we reach a stage, possibly with the vaccine coming in, where we may be able to accept a new normal that is more or less coming back to our previous situation, but still having physical distancing, masks and all the other precautions. That may happen sometime, I would say by the middle of next year. But saying that when will we be able to go back to a situation like we were in the pre-COVID era, that may take a little longer time, that we could say that now the WHO can say that the pandemic is truly over and we are now back to where we were in 2019.
Because Dr. Laharia, if I could bring you in here, it's interesting and it's been wonderful to speak to so many public health experts in the last months, as it were. But the fact remains that in India, public health has really been at the bottom of any priorities, whether it's been political priorities, government priorities, or media priorities. We never look at public health. In fact, the irony is that in India, health is mainly in private hands. So isn't the fact that we have lots of public health experts, but the worries over the public health system are being actually faced by us only in the middle of a pandemic?
Sonia, this is exactly the reason we decided to write this book. Around 3 months after the pandemic, we realized that there is a lot of discussion going on about strengthening health system and improving public health. And we also know that government, whether it's a union or state governments, are well intentioned. Over the years, they have been talking about strengthening public health or more investment in public health. However, the reality states that all those intentions have not been translated into actions or outcomes. So in this book, we reflect that what are the possible reasons that those intentions are not translated into outcomes. And we thought that probably one of the reasons is that the broader discourse of health systems and public health, though they are talked a lot, but the understanding among us policymakers and many people about what health system and public health is not clear. For example, we keep talking about strengthening health system, and we heard during the pandemic, early phase of pandemic, but much of the discussion was focused on increasing hospital beds or ventilators or improving a little bit of COVID-19 testing services. But in the book, we discussed that health system is much more. It has it is all about leadership and governance. It's about service delivery. It's about improving medicines, vaccines, and supplies. It is about improving health information system. So there are many components of health system which are not fully understood, and that's why the outcomes are not achieved, because we keep focusing upon one of subcomponents. So quickly wrapping this up, the idea of this book is that we want to share a common understanding of health system. We want to share an understanding that healthcare is not about medical care, but there's a component of public health. And unless you prevent, promote, and maintain good health, which is a public health, India is not going to achieve the good health outcomes. So in this book, we are talking about till we win and beyond, that how to carry and continue this dialogue of health system strengthening. And we hope that this book, which is intended for general reader and policymakers alike, in a sense will work accountability mechanism where better understanding will result in better health outcomes.
And in fact, you mentioned the two case studies in a sense of Delhi and Bihar, and we've just finished an election in Bihar where we saw, Dr. Kang, that a free vaccine was also one of the poll promises. I think it's the first time in a state election that a vaccine has been top of the agenda. But what's interesting, and when we talk about vaccines, and I think that very important point you made about the cost of the Pfizer vaccine, the fact that we don't even have a cold chain system for a vaccine, an RNA vaccine, which would need, I think, minus 80 degrees storage, 80 degrees centigrade storage. When you look at indigenous vaccines, and of course that has been your experience as well, do you think looking at vaccines specifically in the Indian scenario is what will be the focus ahead? We've seen two cases, the Covaxin, the Bharat Biotech looking at a made in India possible vaccine, or do you think this is the time when also we have to look at the, say, often apartheid between richer nations where you know the US has already bought stocks of vaccine which India may not have access to, even though we are the largest production of vaccines in the world as in making vaccines?
So I think vaccine nationalism is a threat to the rest of the world, especially to low and middle income countries. We are incredibly fortunate in the vaccine industry that we do have. We already have vaccine candidates that are in clinical trials, and all of them include the spike protein. Covaxin is based on an inactivated virus. The DNA vaccine that Zydus Cadila is trying has the spike sequence. And then there is the AstraZeneca vaccine with Serum Institute, which is also spike based. And if the gamma layer results from today hold up, then it's very likely that both the AstraZeneca and the gamma layer vaccine in the partnership with Dr. Reddy's laboratories will work. It's a question of how well they will work. So in the sense of India and our population being protected, it's looking really pretty good at the moment. What I worry about is the rest of the world, particularly other countries in South Asia and in Africa, which don't have access to vaccines. South America has some vaccine manufacturers in Brazil, but will they be able to make enough to be able to provide all of South America? These are the things that we need to be thinking about as global citizens. And I think India and its vaccine companies have a huge role to play in protecting ourselves and the rest of the world.
And of course, in that sense, Dr. Guleria, the experience you had in polio immunization will perhaps come in useful here in terms of delivering it to a population of 130 crores. But tell me, Dr. Guleria, we talk about the lessons that we have to learn, the public health systems, but even as we speak, we see what's happening in our capital, where you're sitting in Delhi with a double whammy of air pollution, which we talk about year after year, but nothing changes, though that is a public health emergency. In fact, it's killing, the latest report shows that how many Indians it's killing, that now, as you pointed out, coupled with COVID. What would you tell our policymakers, our chief minister, our prime minister, whoever's our health minister, because nothing seems to change year after year, even though we're seeing the death rate going up in Delhi, as you pointed out, perhaps because of the link with air pollution as well.
So I think health has to become a priority issue for all governments and for policymakers. That is very important, and this is what the pandemic has actually brought in forward, that when we talk of health, both preventive and promotive health and even tertiary health, at all levels we have to really work harder. There is a lot that has to be done as far as preventive health is concerned, because a lot of diseases, especially non-communicable diseases, which is now the increasing burden of disease as far as India is concerned, can be prevented by a lot of good preventive health. And that is having good air, having good sanitation, having good drinking water. All of this will go a long way as far as having our citizens have good health. So I think this is something that has been brought out by this pandemic. But you're very right that till now, health has not been that much of a priority. It's always been growth, housing and things like that. And because of that, we have actually, for economic growth, we have actually compromised as far as our health or environment is concerned. And we are paying the price for that. Every year we talk about air pollution in Delhi. Every year we see air quality going up to the very severe range and even sometimes crossing what the meter can actually measure, that is beyond 999. And we forget about it in March, April, when the winters are over and air quality improves because of the weather improving and there being the temperature going up and wind velocity improving. So I think there has to be a sustainable plan which is available and can be implemented at all levels, not only in Delhi, but even in the surrounding states and in the Indo-Gangetic plain. Pollution is something that we have to really tackle aggressively. And there are examples from other parts of the world where it has been done successfully. So it's not that it's impossible, it cannot be done,
Beijing,
but there has to be a will to do it.
Beijing, which seems to have managed pollution as well as controlled the virus which originated from there. So that's the irony perhaps as we debate this today. But Dr. Gulleria, you're currently at AIIMS treating patients who are coming in with COVID. What is the direct impact you're seeing of the air pollution on them?
So what has been shown and what we're seeing is likely to be relative, but there is enough data which suggests that, and we've seen that even in the past years, that people who have underlying chronic respiratory diseases or cardiovascular diseases, when we looked at our data and we did this prospective study of following up, looking at our admissions for in the emergency for 2 years, and looking at correlating that with air quality index, we found that whenever air quality deteriorated, in the next 6 days, there was a spike of patients coming up with respiratory problems in the emergency, and this was both in children and in adults, clearly showing that as the air quality worsens, those who have chronic respiratory problem like asthma, bronchitis, actually have a bad time and have to come to the emergency more frequently. Now, combining that with COVID-19, which also affects the lungs and can have systemic effects involving the heart, it really makes things very worrisome, because what it indirectly means is that with COVID-19 and air pollution at the level it is in Delhi, we are going to see not only more cases, but more severe cases, especially in the high-risk group. So it's a very worrying scenario, and data from China, from Northern Italy, and there's a preprint paper from the US, all suggest that just 1 microgram per meter cube increase in PM 2.5 can lead to almost an 8 to 9% increase in COVID deaths.
Dr. Laharia, if I could bring you in here, you talk also in the book about leadership and health systems. So just to ask, because of course we're soon going to have a budget coming up. We talk about health, but we know that a proportion of GDP spent on health is amongst the lowest in developing countries. Also that often we look at the West, but the models perhaps are more in South Asia and countries like South Korea, which seem to have handled with their previous experience, have seemed to be able to equip to handle outbreaks like this better than India is. Is this the time, even while we're in the middle of a pandemic and coming out of it perhaps, to start putting those systems into place, whether it's about primary health, whether it's about other aspects, more doctors and nurses, healthcare workers?
So we have now learning both from India and our neighboring countries. For example, Thailand Vietnam have controlled the disease fairly well. Taiwan has done really well. Even within India, in the last 10 months of pandemic, we have realized that the COVID-19 testing services, the importance of community participation, people following some of the public health measures, which are the most common way to prevent the disease, face mask, hand washing, and physical distancing. So over a period of time, we have learned a few things, which are that a stronger primary healthcare system can tackle these many pandemic epidemics. Second, there is a strong role of community and participation of people in these interventions. Third, most of the interventions which have been done during the pandemic, because as we wait for therapy and vaccine, are public health interventions, the preventive intervention. So probably there has never been a time in the history, in the recent history, where the importance of public health intervention has been understood. And all these discussions had happened in the past. For example, India's National Health Policy 2017 has recommended that there should be 2.5% of GDP on health. Government spending should be 2.5% of GDP. It also suggests that of that entire government spending, 2/3 or more should be going for primary health care. So many of those messages or policy prescriptions were already there. But now we have a proof that this is a time we should intervene on this. The final part is that the importance of public health has always been understood. And National Health Policy and NITI Aayog's 5-year strategic plan suggested to formulate public health cadre across Indian states, but only 2 or 3 Indian states have public health cadre. So to summarize my point, we have learned enough from this pandemic, from India and other countries. We need stronger primary health care. We need stronger public health. The commitment government has already made in the National Health Policy, if those are implemented, we can make a fairly good progress. And more importantly, another part which I want to highlight and which is learning, if Dharavi model is taken, it could succeed because of community participation. So we need to engage community in the health service delivery. And the other learning from pandemic is the mental health services, which are really scarce. And we need to look for models to scale up mental health care services up to rural India.
Absolutely. Dr. Kang, final thoughts. As we were talking specifically with you about vaccines, but just to ask, the speed with which vaccines are being developed is something which is at an emergency level, of course, because globally the need for it is felt. But will these be the fastest vaccines ever developed? Will they be safe? Because there's so many questions raised about the China vaccine, the Russia vaccine, others. Do you think this scale of speed is desirable at this stage? Do you think it's absolutely essential?
I think it's desirable. I think the vaccine industry has done an absolutely phenomenal job in partnership with academia, in partnership with governments. The fact that we can make vaccines so quickly, a vaccine made in less than a year has never happened before. If we can make vaccines in less than a year, can we make them in less than 6 months? I think it's something for us to think about and work towards. What has happened in the last 10 months is that the vaccine industry capacity, the ecosystem for vaccine development has changed completely. Mm-hmm. There have never been so many different kinds of platforms all targeting one pathogen. There have never been so many approaches, so much partnership between regulators, agencies such as the WHO, companies, governments. Mm-hmm. I think if we can do this, we can do even better than this. Are we compromising on safety? We are not compromising on safety. It's very important to remember that in most vaccine trials, you test vaccines in thousands of people, sometimes tens of thousands of people. That is exactly what is being done now. And in fact, despite the fact that Pfizer has a good readout for efficacy for its vaccine, it cannot submit to the FDA even for an emergency use authorization right now because the FDA is insisting on at least 2 months of safety data for at least half of the people in the vaccine trial. Mm-hmm. Given that for most vaccines, if you are going to see a side effect, you see it within 6 weeks, this is a rational recommendation to make. Mm-hmm. Will it detect every side effect ever? No, it will not. But many vaccines that have been through the traditional licensure pathway have also not detected every last side effect that there is. Take the example of something like Guillain-Barré syndrome or the paralytic poliomyelitis that you can get with oral polio vaccines. If you did a trial today in 100,000 children, you would not be able to detect that. You need to be using the vaccine in millions of children to see that side effect. So if there are really, really rare side effects, we will not find them at this stage. We will see them only after the vaccine is used in millions. But those side effects, as I said, will be really, really rare. The common side effects, anything that happens 1 in 1,000 people, will be picked up in these trials. So we are not compromising safety at all. What we are doing is really strengthening the vaccine industry and the vaccine research and development ecosystem.
Absolutely. I think that's a reassuring words to hear and crucial. Dr. Guleria, final words from you. You've talked about being patient, that the next year as well may have to continue with social distancing, hand washing, wearing masks. But the fact is that today, as we see in Delhi, you will see crowded markets where people are out there shopping as if the COVID virus doesn't exist. Political parties are holding campaigns as normal, celebrations as normal. So who is meant to be doing the social distancing? Because if you look around us, none of this is happening.
So that's the unfortunate part, that and this has been something which has been even seen during the 1918 pandemic, that the second wave, which was sort of bigger than the first wave, happened because people sort of gave up on physical distancing, wearing masks, and the standard non-pharmaceutical measures. We need to continue to do this, because even if you look at data from the Sero surveys that were done, a large majority of Indians are still susceptible to the infection, and that is true for large areas of our country. And therefore, we still have a population which can get infected, and many of them can get serious infection not only during the illness, but even as a post-COVID sequelae. And therefore, I think it's important for us to be able to send this message across to individuals across the country that the pandemic is not over. We still are in the thick of it, and we have to continue with our wearing masks, with our physical distancing and our hand hygiene, because if we don't do that, we will ultimately have to pay a price with increasing number of cases, as we've seen in the capital.
Right, and I think the message from all three of you is listen to the medicine, listen to the science, listen to the doctors, and that's the message of Till We Win. I hope our leadership, political, I hope the people out there in markets, the people going back to life as normal realize it still is something extremely dangerous, but we will win this. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to speak to the three of you. Thank you.